Good morning. Good morning. Uh, Welcome. How's everybody doing today? That great, huh? Well, I understand it's rough everywhere. We're all struggling and just trying to plow through to the end of the semester. Anyway, so today's today our plan is to um, go through and we're going to have a conversation, a debate about um, the topic that I posted over the weekend. Um, Give me 1 second. That topic is right here. That adverse possession doctrine affords societies a way to prevent violence over conflicting claims to land. And so the way that we're going to structure this is you guys are going to get some time in a breakout room um, for each side. And so uh, there are 5 seats in the affirmative breakout room, 5 seats in the negative. They're going to be assigned on a first come, first serve basis. So I'm going to set them up now. And again, what's going to happen is um, you should be able to uh, move from this main session into the breakout room of your choice, at least until one of them is full, and then I will assign you. But what I have found is that some uh, Zoom setups are not giving you the option to move. So if that happens, if you can't find the way to move into the breakout rooms, just either say in voice or post in the chat which side you'd like to be on, and I will move you over there. We're going to spend about 15 minutes in these breakout rooms. So let's go ahead and move over there. I'm sorry, there's going to be 5 seats in the negative room and 4 seats in the affirmative room. So there's going to be a little bit of unbalance because the negative has a harder time here. The reason for that is the uh, the affirmative. I say the negative has a harder time, and suddenly people start moving into the affirmative room. Uh, the affirmative can draw on the assigned readings to help to sort of build the argument. The reading is putting forward an argument. The negative has to build their argument out of a criticism. So 2 more seats in the affirmative. It happens, Maisha. It happens. Which side would you rather be on? I can assign you. Okay. That's 4 in the affirmative. There's 1 seat left in the affirmative room. And everybody else is going in the negative. Okay. Gabrielle, okay, thanks. Okay, so appreciate you guys going into the breakout rooms and having that conversation amongst yourselves. So just as a reminder, the question is in the chat. So let's hear from our friends on the affirmative first, right? So what's your argument for the question? Don't all jump in at once.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
This is just one of the arguments. I would say that adverse possession, since it puts a limit on the time frame in which you can claim the land, persons would be able to put in their requests, etc., and have the land disputes sorted out in a timely manner. So that would, as it says, prevent violence over conflicting claims to land.
Okay. Any other arguments? I'm not saying that there's good or bad about that. I want to make sure that we hear the complete list of what you guys want to offer. So go ahead, Maisha.
Yes, one other point that we would have looked at was that in creating social and economic stability, it diffuses or it reduces the violence that can come from conflicting land issues, because with the economic instability, you would have persons not without the doctrine of adverse possession, you would have situations where there is no security of title, which means that it would impact on the, let's say, the economic and social status of the persons that do not have this adverse possession. Why I say that is because you may have someone who is squatting, as per se, without having, without using the doctrine of adverse possession. They cannot, let's say, have a proper structure of housing. They cannot have, let's say, proper running water or electricity, because they don't have that actual possession of the land. And this may create conflict or violence within that particular group or class of persons. And with the doctrine of adverse possession, it allows them to gain that title so long as the time limit has been satisfied. I hope I didn't sound too confusing, but
No, I think it makes sense. As I understand it, what you're saying is that the settlement of title disputes prevents self-help. And as we know, self-help can very easily devolve into violence. Is that your argument? Am I understanding
yes,
it correctly? Okay.
yes, because persons can come, you can have your property here today on this title that you don't legally own. You have property there, you built it there, you leave home, you come back.
Okay. Great. I think all of that's really, really helpful. Regina, you've been very patient with your hand up, so go ahead.
Okay, well, she actually covered what I was going to say. I was just going to say that the fact that the doctrine of adverse possession establishes a clear owner of the property, given the connection between property disputes and violence as seen in Timor-Leste, I was just saying that given that it establishes this clear-cut owner, that can reduce the possibility of violence, because you know who the owner is, as opposed to, you know, they're having tensions and stuff surrounding that.
Okay.
Yeah, but she covered it in the last part. So.
I understand. Okay. Anything else from the affirmative before we move on? I want to make sure that you guys feel like you've had it all the chance you need. So, anything else from the affirmative? Okay, so let's hear from the negative. What does the negative have to say? And again, as I said before you went into the breakout rooms, I think the negative has the harder task here. So if you feel like your arguments are not as polished or as clear as the affirmative, I suspect that you may be wrong about that. But even if you're right, it's okay because you were given a harder task. So let's hear from the negative.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In the negative, the issue will arise, really and truly, if adverse possession is had, where a person may have passed and the land may lay dormant because the heirs may not be knowledgeable of the passing and that they are literally heirs. And then when you come on adverse possession of the property, it can still cause violence. So the doctrine really and truly, if it was laid out different, that you would have seek out the people first, then when we adverse them, but seek out the people first, and if you can't find them, well, then you will tell the law, well, I tried, so I take it, because I tried. But when it can only cause problem when heirs are there and somebody don't even know that person there. In Bible, 106 square miles, people may know one another across the back. But in other jurisdiction where the a vast number, land of vast number of people adverse possession is madness. It's madness when it comes to like heirs. Point two, boundaries. Sometimes you have adverse possession and you're not really sure what the boundary is. Somebody's calling from peace, you calling from peace, and the drawing also a conclusion that you work upon that piece is yours. But when it comes to boundaries, it's going to be conflict and it's going to be wars. And this is best settled by no adverse possession. It is going to cause problem with inheritance, with heirs. It's going to cause problem with boundaries, and also going to cause problem with debt proving. I mean to say, you could say 10 years, I'm not going to say 15 years. You don't say, well, that's true, you ain't from here 10 years. You can't prove it. And if you try proving it, whatever means you take, people can draw illustrations where you thought you was on it, but this person was could prove differently. And proving it even itself ticklish. You could demarcate it. Some people said that they'll send a bill to the south, the potential current and also other thing and establish something. But it all boils down. Proving itself could present an issue and cause problem with the rightful owner and the landowner. You got two person possessing land at the same time. You would say that my clock start before yours, no, so my clock start before yours. But when it really truly, when you go off a piece of land and you adverse protect, there's very few people that really and truly count things. They only realize that way I can get this land for 2 years. Let me start counting. And the same, I would say 5 years, I would say 10 years. But really and truly, and then somebody's there with you and say, no, you come after me. Say, no, you come after you. And it's gonna cause problem with adverse possession persons themselves and also the person that rightfully own the property, because you really and truly got problem with the debt, and I got problem, you got problem with debt, and I got problem with that. So adverse possession will always cause problem. And by nature, adverse possession, that in itself lends the argument that this is problematic. So I can understand society position wanting to look land not being dormant and inactive, but they got to find a better doctrine that adverse possession. And by nature, it go against goodness. It go against I work hard for my thing and I want to leave it. And if I want to leave it for 10 years and go and come back, tax me by coming back to my property, tax me. But yeah, you don't want to tax me, you want to give it away, you want to say this and say that. But really and truly, good say, when I say good, I mean the law of goodness and law of decency, law of nature. Say goodness. What a man want is a man want. Could there let the man distribute or disperse his property how he sees it. Don't be a bully with it. Don't come and bully me with it. And I find adverse possession is a doctrine straight from the pit of hell. Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate the visit from St. Thomas Aquinas. In all seriousness, I thought that was a very well argued and well put together argument that at the very end sort of dropped off into some things that maybe are not quite as universally accepted, but are certainly valid to offer. So, Johnny, please don't take that as a criticism when I say that. Sydney, you asked to have the opportunity to speak next, so go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Good morning. Go ahead.
Right. So there's one thing I wanted to highlight before I go into the points was that I heard the positive side make a point about the development of land and how if you don't have ownership of the land, it kind of restricts that. Well, I can only speak for Grenada's context because I'm a Grenadian, and that is actually definitely not true. People must be building full stores, houses with full electricity, power, everything on land that, well, in technicality that they squat on and so forth. So while we can say that in theory, in actual practice, that isn't really how a lot of the squatters operate. But I wanted to go into the points I had for the negative side. I just have a few of them in brief. So I want to talk about the fact that adverse possession favors the most efficient use of land, which may not necessarily command social and economic stability, especially if you have cases where, for instance, we know this particular piece of land is owned by person A. We know that there's a reserve of oil on this particular piece of land, right? What stops people from squatting and claiming possession of those kinds of resources and things by abusing the doctrine of adverse possession? It's a doctrine that's, well, the way that it's constructed is very easy to abuse. Furthermore, what I wanted to highlight as well was the Timor-Leste situation from the article that we had to read and so forth. It highlights the fact that where we have these various legal systems and things and the different enforcements that came with colonization and invasion, all those kind of things, where you have that kind of thing, especially where their property rights are intrinsically tied with their constitution. What happens then? Because adverse possession would be considered a human rights violation in those instances. Furthermore, one of the major components of adverse possession, and when I say components, I don't mean an element, I mean it's the fact that you have to have knowledge of the law. Adverse possession claims don't come about unless the owner of the person who would, I guess, have the legal title vested in them brings those claims about against the trespasser. So what that brings a whole issue then of like lack of knowledge in society and accessibility to the courts to actually make this a functional thing. Because then we have a situation where the party with the more knowledge and resources would be favored. So then again, how can it ensure title security if the law isn't accessible or understood by the people it's supposed to protect or govern, right? And then I would also like to say that adverse possession punishes title holders who have been unable to oust trespassers. So what again, if that there's a situation where the person doesn't have the resources to go about evicting trespassers, like they can't hire the appropriate legal parties to serve notices, to remove themselves from the property and so forth. What then happens if they don't have the resources to oust the trespassers? And then again, the Timor-Leste situation also highlighted the circumstances. Like what if the time issue is exacerbated due to extreme circumstances? Like for instance, a lot of those people were forced to leave the country because of the political instability and the fact that their lands, homes, businesses, all those things were taken over and burned down and repurposed and all those kinds of things. So what if the time issue comes about because you're literally forced to become a fugitive, not a fugitive, sorry. what's the word I'm thinking of? A refugee. Wow, I don't know how I mix up those two things. Sorry. What happens in a situation where you're forced to become a refugee in somebody else's country and that forces you to be away from your land because of circumstances far beyond your control? How then can we say adverse possession would be fair to apply in any of those circumstances? Yeah, that's my point. So thank you.
Okay. Maisha, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yes. In relation to what was just discussed, we she spoke about the issue in the article. However, the issue within the region, well, I can speak, she can speak to Grenada, I can speak to St. Kitts and Nevis. And what I see is that in the entire region, we have a lot of migration. And that migration is by choice. A lot of people choose to migrate and return, and you have a lot of property that is abandoned property, lots of lands that are probably devaluing other people's property in terms of the overgrowth and so on. And if somebody comes and squats on that land and uses the land where you abandoned it, I don't see that it should be looked at in such a negative light, in the sense that, for one, a lot of properties that are abandoned and have not been adversely possessed are used for criminal activities. They are used to, let's say, as crack houses or houses where they may hide drugs and weapons. And because you cannot or because you do not possess these things or do not seek to take over this property, be it an individual or the state, because you can't necessarily withhold that right of the individual to own property, or yes, to own property, you still have a duty to the other persons as to their safety in regards to property that is around. So I think there has been some discussion here where in St. Kitts, sorry, and Nevis, where the government is seeking to let's say repossess these properties, or let's say adverse proposal like repossess, because they would not have met the time requirements, but to take back these properties as in some particular areas as to promote social and economic stability, and also to prevent criminal activities. And I think it was discussed that persons who cannot afford to take the trespasser to court, I am thinking that a simple summons would do, and that is particularly cheap. And also, I do agree, however, that there are instances where it disadvantages the owner, as Ms. Walker would have said, in regards to persons that didn't have a choice as to whether or not they could leave. And I think that is a valid point. And however, where you choose to leave and not return, and I don't think that the land should have, or the land or the property should be wasted, especially in instances where land is not that readily available. Because you may have some territories like St. Martin where it is overcrowded and there is not much land to own. So that is that for me.
Okay, I absolutely, one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that, adverse possession develops in a context where like the context is one where land is not seen as an especially scarce resource, right? Now, that changes over time because of the enclosures movement and whatnot, but then a lot of major developments in adverse possession doctrine have actually been American. And so those, that's a completely different context where land is almost never scarce, right? There's always room for more. The United States is still not full by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that's a really helpful point that Maisha brings up, that that there are issues with land being crowded. So Sydney, I appreciate your patience. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So what I wanted to say that I do agree with Maisha. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sorry. Well, I do agree with her in saying that, yes, there comes a time when you have to consider as well those who migrated by choice and just left their land. But then that brings the whole question of, like, how do we balance the rights then? Because then that brings across the point that if we have people who are forced to migrate and then people who are migrate that choice, that means there has to be a certain level of flexibility and understanding in the application of adverse possession. And that's one thing I really liked in the Timor-Leste article, is that the author mentioned the fact that in implanting the adverse possession doctrine in Timor-Leste, that the judicial system would really have to focus on a certain level of flexibility to suit their social and economic context and so forth. And when Maisha mentioned about sermons and being cheap and so forth, cheapness doesn't necessarily equal accessibility, especially if the judicial system isn't properly equipped to handle those kind of claims where there is no knowledge of the people, of the actual owners of the land and how to exercise their rights and going about these things. So cost alone doesn't equal accessibility. Yeah, that's all I had to add.
So Sydney raises, I think, a really important issue, which is that does the doctrine itself eliminate violence through the settling of claims, or does the doctrine act through a legitimate and respected institution, right? In the whether it's the courts or an administrative agency, does there have to be do you have to have the legitimacy in order to have the doctrine be effective as a curb on violence? Riandra, I think that's a really interesting question, and I want to come back to it in a minute. Maisha, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Sydney in that cheapness doesn't really mean accessibility. So, but apart from that, though, we discussed persons who migrate by choice and persons who migrate by force. But we failed to discuss persons who are actually present on the island and have persons who are on their land, and these persons sometimes abuse the doctrine of adverse possession as well. It's not only the person who seeks to adversely possess abuses the doctrine, but persons who would stand on the other end of adverse possession. I say this because if you are aware that someone is squatting on your piece of land and you see them building on that land, then and you know that, for instance, here the time limit is 12 years, and at 8 years the person builds on the property, and after building on the property you seek to make a claim in court that the person does not have a right or legal right to that property, and you seek to have them treated as a trespasser. They have not reached the time limit as yet, but what then becomes of the property that has already been built? I don't know. I'm asking. because you deliberately waited until the property was finished, knowing that the person has not reached the time limit to adversely possess, and then you make a claim to have them removed from the property.
And the answer, Maisha, right, is that the adverse possessor accepts the risk of that particular outcome, right? You're building on a piece of property that you don't own, and so you are running the risk that the title owner is going to come along and take everything that you've done. And Johnny makes a good point that some of the cases acknowledge that that adverse possession is basically legalized theft, and that the courts and the legislature have decided that this is a form of theft that serves a purpose and that we are going to allow. You know, I don't necessarily I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with that analysis, but that is the analysis that, yeah, you're right, and we don't care. So Regina, go ahead, and then Sydney.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment in response to what Johnny would have said about the doctrine allowing persons to act as a thief in the night. I feel like that is not the best way to describe it, because how can I act as a thief in the night when I've been there for, let's say, 12 years, for example? Like, yeah, at first it may have been that I acted as a thief, but then is it a case where, I don't want to say negligent, but at some point, isn't it on your, like, isn't it your fault basically that you didn't check or maintain or engage with your land? Like, so it's like, even in Barbados, for example, there are lots of cases where like persons would abandon their land, it's overgrown, etc. Rodents, bees, all those kind of stuff, which cause nuisance to other persons. And as soon as someone, let's say, clears the land or wants to engage with the land, then the owner comes back to claim it. And I feel like the person hasn't acted as a thief in the night, because your land was there for how many other years and you did nothing. But as soon as someone sought to clear the land or to engage with it, which you were not doing for such a long time, then you claim the land. And I feel like I don't feel like the person is acting as a thief in the night. I feel like it's a case where I'm taking advantage of something that you not only didn't take advantage of, but you allowed it to run to ruin.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that one of the requirements of an adverse possession claim is that the possession be sort of out in the open where anybody can see it, right? You can't sort of you can't be a thief in the night, right? You can't possess when no one's looking and then go and hide when someone's there. Sydney, you get the last word because we are out of time. I'm sorry, Johnny. So
yeah. So what I wanted to say is, like, in response to Maisha talking about well, yeah, we knew what she was talking about, right? I would recommend that you guys look at the adverse possession case on EC Courts, the database for the majority of cases in the OECS and stuff. And there I've encountered a lot of cases where the owner tries to benefit from whatever the adverse possessor would have built or put on the property and so forth. A lot of the times, the court has ruled in the favor of the adverse possession, but it was mostly on the basis that that the original owner would have been making representations to induce them into feeling that they would be able to inhabit this land without any sort of problem. So it's just something for you guys to consider and look into.
yeah, absolutely. If title owners engage in that sort of misconduct, right, where they're saying, "Oh yeah, you totally can stay," and then they take that away. Those actually are not necessarily adverse possession cases. Okay, well, we are out of time, but I really appreciate everyone's engagement and hard work today. It's very evident that you guys have been thinking on the topic, and I really appreciate that. So I will see you guys this afternoon, and we will start talking about. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Just a quick question. This afternoon in the lecture, you're going to be providing any guidance on the exam Like how many questions we're supposed to answer
That's going to be next week.
next week?
Yep, next Thursday's lecture will be the review session.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Then I will see you guys this afternoon. And take care and bye.